because regularly it's ministers who haven't direct responsibility for areas come and deliver the good or bad news. But it's actually nice to have a minister who is directly responsible for these issues coming to the House, so I'd like to thank him for that. There is a scheme that's been available for many, many years where mobility impaired people are exempt from VRT and VAT on vehicles that are purchased that perhaps may need slight adaptation to suit people who might be wheelchair users and so on. And it is absolutely appropriate because obviously people who have a mobility impairment have a difficulty getting around, and it is an incentive to try and give them some independence and facilitate a level playing pitch, if you like, and facilitate equality. So I think it's a very worthwhile scheme and an appropriate scheme. The problem is that that scheme doesn't apply to other people with significant disabilities. And I'm speaking specifically on behalf of blind or visually impaired people who legally cannot drive. I'm talking about people who are legally blind, that their eyesight is at such a level that it is defined as being legally blind, and are not able and will never be able to drive. And obviously they have the same requirements of mobility and equality that everybody else has. And if, let's say, there's a husband and wife situation and the wife is blind or visually impaired and the husband purchases a car which is used to transport that person, they're not entitled to the VAT back, or they're not entitled to VRT exemption. I think that that's unfair. I think that there is a very strong case for having this exemption extended to blind and visually impaired people in order to, I suppose, facilitate an equal society and to allow them have the same benefits as people who use wheelchairs and people who have other mobility issues. I think that it has been brought to my attention recently, and you'd think that I would have probably been aware of this a little bit more, but obviously it wasn't to that degree until it was brought to my attention by a lady who bought a car recently and who had a friend who was a wheelchair user who bought a similar car, who got a significant discount, and this person hasn't got any discount at all. I think that there is a very, very compelling case that this should be extended to blind and visually impaired people in the next budget. And I'd like to see this gesture, and not even a gesture, but an act of equality done in the lifetime of this government.
Tara.
Thank you very much, Cahirlach, and I'd like to thank Senator Conway for raising this matter this morning, and here on behalf of Minister Noonan, who regrets that he's unable to be present due to other business, but does very much appreciate the importance of the issue that you raise. The Disabled Drivers and Disabled Passenger Scheme is a tax concession, as the Senator will know, and it's for that reason that it falls within the remit of the Department of Finance. Perhaps I could first provide a brief description of the scheme as it currently stands. The scheme provides relief from vehicle registration tax and VAT on the purchase of a specially adapted vehicle, assistance with fuel costs in relation to the running costs of the vehicle, and an exemption from motor tax to drivers and passengers with disability who fulfil the medical criteria required to qualify for the scheme. The primary legislation authorising the Minister for Finance to make regulations providing for tax concessions to disabled drivers and passengers is contained in Section 92 of the Finance Act 1989, and the regulations introduced subsequently to govern the scheme, including the eligibility criteria, are contained in the Disabled Drivers and Disabled Passengers Tax Concessions Regulations of 1994. Currently, to qualify for the scheme, an applicant must have a permanent and severe physical disability within the terms of the regulations and satisfy one of the 6 qualifying criteria outlined in the regulations. The Senior Medical Officer for the relevant local health service executive administrative area makes a professional clinical determination as to whether an individual applicant satisfies the medical criteria. A successful applicant is provided with a primary medical certificate, which is required under the regulations to claim the reliefs provided for under the scheme. An unsuccessful applicant can appeal the decision of a senior medical officer to the Disabled Drivers Medical Board of Appeal, which makes a new clinical determination in respect of the individual. The regulations mandate that the Medical Board of Appeal is independent in the exercise of its functions to ensure the integrity of its clinical determinations. After 6 months, a citizen can reapply if there is a deterioration in their condition. The 6 qualifying criteria are necessarily both strict and precise. They are: A, be wholly or almost wholly without the use of both legs; B, be wholly without the use of one leg and almost wholly without the use of another leg, such that the applicant is severely restricted as to the movement of the lower limbs. C, be without both hands or without both arms. D, be without one or both legs. E, be wholly or almost wholly without the use of both hands or arms and wholly or almost wholly without the use of one leg. F, have the medical condition of dwarfism and have serious difficulties of movement of the lower limbs. So the criteria is very strict and precise. The scheme and qualifying criteria were designed specifically for those with severe physical disabilities. The Minister for Finance frequently receives correspondence from applicants who do not meet the qualifying criteria but feel that they could benefit from the scheme, and Senator Conway has made a compelling case in relation to people with visual impairments here this morning. While the Minister is very sympathetic to these arguments to those people who do not qualify for the scheme, he cannot currently, given the scale and scope of the scheme, expand it within the current context of constrained resources. The scheme represents a significant tax expenditure. Between the vehicle registration tax and the VAT foregone and the assistance with fuel costs used by members of the scheme, based on provisional figures, the scheme represented a cost of 48.6 million to the Exchequer in 2014, an increase of 5.1 million on the 2013 cost. This figure does not include the revenue foregone to the local government fund in respect of the relief from motor tax provided to members of the scheme. In terms of the number of claims to the scheme in 2014, there were 4,936 claims for vehicle registration tax and VAT relief, and 12,338 claims in respect of the repayment of excise on the fuel element of the scheme. The Minister for Finance recognises that this scheme plays an important role in expanding the mobility of citizens with disabilities, and as a consequence, the relief has been maintained at current levels throughout the very difficult economic crisis, despite the requirement for significant fiscal consolidation. Accordingly, as I've already stated, while Minister Noonan is sympathetic to the compelling argument made by Senator Conway, in the still challenging fiscal environment, there are no current plans to expand the medical criteria beyond the 6 currently provided for in the Disabled Drivers and Disabled Passengers Regulations 1994. However, in light of the case made by Senator Conway, I will indeed pass on his very serious views and a transcript of this debate to Minister Noonan and ask that he keep the matter under review.
Brief question, Senator.
I'd like to thank the Minister. I'm not unduly surprised with the reply. I suppose the reason I'm putting it down is just to flag for the future, because as our economy does become more buoyant, we do have responsibilities to ensure that all our citizens are treated equally. And certainly all of the 6 categories that were outlined is appropriate that they would, but I think that there is a 7th category that should be included, and hopefully at some future date, in the not too distant future, we might, with our economy improving, be in a position to facilitate that.
Yeah, in response, I think Senator Conway is quite right. As we enter a period of economic recovery, and as that recovery takes hold, fragile still as it is, it's appropriate that we begin a debate about what one does with economic recovery. And therefore, I welcome the fact that Senator Conway has raised the issue. I would point out that this is an issue that the Department of Finance does keep under constant review, but the Senator will obviously appreciate the costs of the scheme as outlined by me to the House, and obviously we don't want to make unrealistic promises to people. This government doesn't do this. However, I think this government, in relation to people with disabilities, has made a number of welcome reforms. I think the Assisted Decision-Making Bill, currently published by the Department of Justice, being led by Minister Fitzgerald, I think the first review of special needs education to take place in this country since 1993, and indeed the whole issue of the Mobility Allowance and Motorised Transport Grant. And as the Senator will appreciate, while these are matters for the Minister for Health, I can confirm to the House that the Department of Health is seeking a solution which would best meet the aim of supporting people with severe disabilities who require additional income to contribute towards the cost of their mobility needs while remaining within the available budget and satisfying all legal and equality concerns. And conscious of the reports of the Ombudsman regarding the legal status of the Motorised Transport Grant and Mobility Allowance Scheme in the context of the Equal Status Act, the Government did decide to close both schemes on the 26th of February 2013. In November 2013, the Government decided that the preparatory work required for a new travel subsidy scheme and associated statutory provisions should be progressed by the Minister for Health. Work is ongoing on the policy proposals to be brought to Government for the drafting of primary legislation for a new scheme. The challenge is to provide these benefits to a wider cohort of people while continuing to cater for the 4,700 people already in receipt of a monthly payment within a limited budget. And once the policy proposals have been finalised by the Minister for Health and approved by Government, the time frame for the introduction of a new scheme will become clearer. So there clearly are a number of areas in relation to disability that we're continuing to work on.